الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. حي على الفلاح.
Revolutionary sentiment was characteristic of the era in Iraq and throughout the Middle East. In Iraq, progressives and socialists assailed traditional political elites. Moreover, the pan-Arab nationalism of Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt profoundly influenced young Arabs like Saddam Hussein. The rise of Nasser foreshadowed a wave of revolutions throughout the Middle East in the 1950s and 1960s. Nasser inspired nationalists throughout the Middle East by fighting the British and the French during the Suez Crisis of 1956, modernizing Egypt, and uniting the Arab world politically. Saddam was born in 1937, reared in a mud hut near Tikrit, north of Baghdad. From the age of 10, Saddam was reared by an uncle who encouraged him to dream of becoming a nationalist Arab hero like Saladin. The Ba'ath Party became a vehicle for Hussein. He became an enforcer for the party, and like Joseph Stalin, who fascinated Hussein, he left the intellectuals behind and climbed the ladder of Iraq politics, using a combination of intimidation, fear, nepotism, and outright murder. In 1958, a year after Saddam had joined the Ba'ath Party, army officers led by General Abd al-Karim Qasim overthrew Faisal II of Iraq. The Ba'athists opposed the new government, and in 1959, Saddam was involved in the unsuccessful United States-backed plot to assassinate Karim Qasim. Finally, in February 1963, the Iraqi Ba'ath took power after violently overthrowing Abd al-Karim Qasim and quashing communist-led resistance. Saddam Hussein now began his career as chief of Iraq's security services. He did his job with exceptional efficiency, executing opponents and suspected potential rivals, including scores of high-level government officials and thousands of political prisoners. By 1968, the radical arm of the Ba'ath Party was in total control of Iraq. Saddam Hussein was a consummate party politician whose formative experiences were in organizing clandestine opposition activity. He was adept at outmaneuvering and, at times, ruthlessly eliminating political opponents. By 1969, Saddam Hussein had become the moving force behind the party. He personally directed Ba'athist attempts to settle the Kurdish question, and he organized the party's institutional structure. Within a decade, he had created a police state within Iraq that was so oppressive that it has often received criticism from moderate Arab states. Between 1968 and 1973, through a series of sham trials, executions, assassinations, and intimidations, the party ruthlessly eliminated any group or person suspected of challenging Ba'ath rule. On July 16, 1979, Saddam Hussein officially became President of the Republic, Secretary General of the Ba'ath Party Regional Command, Chairman of the RCC, and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. He was now in complete control of Iraq, but for Saddam, Iraq was not enough. After 23 years in power, Saddam Hussein imagined himself a world player. The Iraqi dictator had used his country's enormous oil revenues and strategic location to entrench himself as a regional force. During a long and bloody war with Iran in the 1980s, Saddam had assembled the world's fourth largest army and equipped it with modern equipment. However, the long war with Iran proved costly. When it ended, Iraq was $80 billion in debt. To pay for that war, Saddam turned his eyes toward Kuwait.
Saddam Hussein was annoyed at the Kuwaitis for, in addition, not really providing a lot of assistance that he wanted in terms of the debt relief, but also for violating the production quotas in OPEC, which OPEC is a cartel, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. They meet regularly to set production quotas with the idea that they will maintain price stability. So if any of the member states are violating the production quotas, potentially that's going to have an adverse effect on all the rest of them, because either they can choose to sell less oil or they can see the price go down. So if you're trying to generate revenue to pay back debt, you need to maximize the price of oil, which so Saddam was annoyed at Kuwait for that particular reason as well.
Saddam put out signals that he had designs on his neighbor, signals that went unanswered in the West.
Supposedly in July of 1990, when Saddam Hussein already had sort of Kuwait in the gun sights, if you will, he met with the United States ambassador, a woman named April Glaspie. Basically, Ambassador Glaspie said the United States takes no position on Arab conflicts. And then around that same time, the State Department released a statement that made it quite clear that the U.S. had no formal alliance obligations to Kuwait, which would suggest that if Kuwait were attacked, the United States would have no responsibility to come to its defense. Those were both certainly mixed signals that some people say may have had an effect influencing Saddam Hussein's decision to go against Kuwait.
Well, I don't think we gave any signals that the invasion of Kuwait would be acceptable, but we did basically support Iraq during the war with Iran. Iran was, I think from Washington's perspective, a pretty deadly enemy at that point after having taken the hostages and not having any relations. And we provided some support to Saddam Hussein in the 1980s.
If the United States had clearly signaled it would be wrong to attack Kuwait, and under the United Nations Charter it's illegal for any state to challenge the territorial integrity of another, and the United States is obliged under the United Nations Charter and as a member state of the Security Council to help to assure the defense of those states, who knows, that might have had the opposite effect of restraining Saddam Hussein. So I think it might be too strong to say it encouraged him, but it might be fair to think about the counterfactual of what would have happened had the U.S. said something completely different.
On August 2nd, 2 Iraqi divisions crossed the Kuwait border. A 3rd division launched a supporting attack further to the west. Meanwhile, Iraqi special forces mounted heliborne and amphibious raids on strategic targets in Kuwait City. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, it was all over. One of the main concerns of the West was the significant threat Iraq posed to Saudi Arabia. Following the conquest of Kuwait, the Iraqi army was within easy striking distance of Saudi oil fields. Possession of these fields, along with Kuwaiti and Iraqi reserves, would have given Hussein control over the majority of the world's oil reserves.
There was some fear that the next stop might be Saudi Arabia, which would be a much bigger player.
That would give Saddam Hussein control over about 40% of the world's reserves. And that was just too much to tolerate.